Okay, I'm gonna just check my sound. Sorry about that. Okay. It's Friday the 28th of August 2020 and we're face to face again for some of you, spreading our germs in a year of horror and terror and locusts and fires and COVID and earthquakes and tornadoes and killer wasps and Donald Trump getting re-elected. That's probably worse than COVID for the world. Today I'm going to talk to you about critical thinking, the critical thinker that probably most influences me. And her name is Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak. But first I want to put forward an idea, a couple of ideas. So our topic is critical thinking. Yeah? Critical thinking. And in the universities worldwide, not as much in Vietnam, but a bit, the humanities and social sciences are under threat. In Australia, I don't know, probably you didn't see this as news here. I haven't seen it in a Vietnamese newspaper, but in Australia, the government has introduced extra high, nearly double, fees for humanities and social sciences because they say that we don't need so many people learning critical theory. We don't need so many people learning the social sciences and humanities because they do not contribute to the economy. In Vietnam, at least, the government knows that that's rubbish, that we have, in the humanities and social sciences, we contribute to, I don't know, Industry 4.0, whatever you want to call it, the cultural economy. And that's an important reason for us to do social sciences and humanities. But we are still called to account. Right? And in Spivak, Gayatri Spivak's work, he says the real problem with the explanations of why the humanities and social sciences are important that are usually given, they do contribute to jobs, misses the really fundamental aspect of what they do, which is cultural support, cultural maintenance. And our job is to actually fight for culture and to reduce the damage that is done to culture by globalization, industrialization, and a kind of instrumental thinking, like a mathematical thinking, or like the ideology, a false ideology of stereotype of the sciences, that rationality is dominant in all we do. It's always there, sure, but it's even in rationality, I think we can argue there's a culture. So let me try this translation and see if that makes more sense. All right, this is from Google Translate, and I know Google Translate is never good enough. But what is critical thinking and cultural autonomy? What I want to try and do today is explain some of the key, very difficult concepts from Gayatri Spivak. A lot of people find it, have misread her, I think, especially her important essay, Can the Subaltern Speak, but other things as well. But the phrase I want to stick with for nearly the whole lesson is this phrase, and what she understands as the rationale for doing humanities and cultural and social sciences or cultural sciences is that teaching is a kind of supplement to everything else in society. That we teach an additional level of thinking. And she wants the teaching to be understood as a kind of process of slow, persistent, patient, raising of questions, raising of issues, and encouragement of critical thinking amongst students, right, or amongst us all, even for ourselves, that is non-coercive. What does non-coercive mean? I can't see what the translation is. So, not to force you to think like me or to think like anyone, to think like the government or to think like Mac or like John Rawls or anyone. Non-coercive, but to encourage a rearrangement of desire, a non-coercive training in skills that are in addition to the basic thing that globalization gives us. Now, two things are completely globalized. Finances, money that flows around the world almost instantaneously, and information, data, flows around the world almost instantaneously. I know we have some Wi-Fi problems because of cables under the sea and all of that, but data and information globalized. And we can look up information and get information in many different ways. Some are easy, some are difficult. But culture does not circulate in the same way. And the social does not. And what we need to attend to, or what Vivek's teaching will encourage us to attend to, and encourage you to think about, to consider how you should attend to, the ways in which simply information retrieval, looking things up on Google or looking in data sets, is not neutral. It's a cultural practice, and we need to develop more sophisticated skills to contextualize and handle that. Okay? We need to see how we talk about the skills. Critical thinking is one of the contexts for this, in which we learn better how to manipulate, how to use, how to handle data, information, whether it be cultural information, social statistic, theory, Kakmak or John Rawls or Gayatri Spivak. How do we become more adept, more skilled at using information that is washing into our inboxes or flowing towards us relentlessly? How to do this, how to handle information with a reflexive, considered, thoughtful practice. And this is the idea of what is research. And in previous weeks, I talked about the search of research. You know there is data coming in about any number of subjects, but how do you search through that? And there's a lot of data. I'm not one that says we are overwhelmed by data. Some people say the data is coming too fast, everything has sped up, I got too many emails today, I can't cope, and they stress, right? It's real, people do stress about having too much information, but if they were paying attention in earlier periods, there was already too much information. What they had in the past, though, was cultural ways to sort that information. Put the information in libraries, have it belong to specialists or experts. Now the information is much more widely available to all of us, but we have, the damage of culture is that we don't have those structures that allow us to cope with all of the information that comes at once. It doesn't mean that we should go back to the old structure, where just some people can go in the library where the knowledge is and no one else can go. I think getting everyone into the library is, giving everyone access to data is important. Right? But we shouldn't go back to an old system where only some people were allowed to manipulate that data. All right, universities in the old day used to be part of that culture, that structure. Only some people could go to university. I mean, it's still the same a bit, but many more people now come to university. In the UK, 50% or so of people go to university. Actually, I don't know the statistic in Vietnam. What percentage of people will go to university now? Anyone know? I must look this up. I'm very interested to know what is the percentage and how much has it changed? It's certainly changed massively since the beginning of the national effort on education in the 80s, right? The socialization. But I haven't seen statistic. But I think it's very high. Certainly families are invested in having people come to university. And what are they doing? So critical thinking involves asking these kind of questions, patiently, slowly building the skills to look at what's going on and say, well, this question raises some further questions about the topic. For example, who is doing the humanities and social sciences? Just by looking around, look around you. You see mostly women are doing humanities and social sciences. What will that tell us? How should we think about that? I don't know, women as custodians of culture or something. Men are not smart enough to do humanities and social sciences, mostly, except us. Joke. You don't need to be so smart to do sciences, maybe? I don't know. Joke. But the key thing from Spivak, from Gayatri Spivak, and I want to talk about her work, what she calls a non-coercive training. Right? This is something where it's non-coercive means that I don't want to force you to change the way you think, but the effort to change the way you think is the basic thing about the social sciences and humanities, or in fact any study. Change the way you think now. That's why we open up a book. You open a book to learn something new, which means change the way you think. Even if it's how to fix a car, but a theory book or something to rearrange how you think. But what is at stake in such rearrangement also needs, you need to think about that. How and why you would want to think about critically what it is you want from education. We talk about rearrangement of desire, non-coercive rearrangement of desire, a phrase from Spivak. What is the desire? Desire to get a degree, get a better job, satisfy your family, learn more about Shakespeare, or learn more about Kakmak, or what is the reasons for opening that book? The basic one is to change the way you think. You think like this now, but you open a book to learn something new. To make your mind, that's the only reason for doing anything, really. To keep yourself alert, alive. So Spivak talks about this kind of thing. No doubt I misrepresent a lot of what she says. But for her, critical thinking is something very different to information retrieval. Everyone can look up on Google. Everyone can look up on Google Scholar, but the level of information is different, and you can attend to that. Okay. The search for questions and answers about what's not yet known. I've talked about this already. Asking questions for things you don't even know, have answers, or even questions to ask. This is for her a responsibility. The responsibility of the scholar is to look for those kind of questions. And this issue of what is critical thinking, you can't just set it aside and park it and have just one course on this. It must be a part of every study. The responsibility of a scholar is to think about the ethics of what they're doing. Ethics. Now, I've come across this word a lot, so I should put it up nice and big. You will have seen this word in my anthropology course, perhaps, and certainly come across it before, but the ethics of scholarship. Let's think about what that will be. What is the responsible thing to do? I don't mean just, although I also mean this, avoiding plagiarism, making sure that if somebody else wrote it down, you don't copy it and pretend that it's yours. Good scholarship, that's good scholarship, sure, but I mean something much more profound than that. Ethical scholarship will be things like, make sure you think about how does knowledge affect other people? How does knowledge relate to the power of institutions? How does the knowledge that you search for relate to the openness of the library or the university? I mean, an ethical issue is some of you may work later for a company and do research for them, just imagine. And they may ask you, a company may ask you to sign something that says that knowledge shall not be used outside of the company. It's a question for you to think about. What is your ethical position on this? Should you say that, yeah, okay, they pay for the knowledge, they can keep it? What is that? The ideology of capital. Capitalization is about ownership of knowledge. And for Vietnam, for example, should that knowledge belong to a company? Say that company is Nike or something, an international company. Wouldn't the ethical thing be to not agree to that in the interest of the nation? Maybe. I don't know the answer, and I'm not trying to force a solution to this question for you, onto you, but I am asking you to ask yourself this kind of question. Or be prepared to ask this kind of question. And critical theory can do this, because critical theory should always be that, like a little figure sitting on your shoulder, asking that question. Is this right? Is this the best way? Is this the ethical thing to do? So Gayatri Spivak, this is her. Okay, she's elderly now. She is probably 142. 60, 70, 76 years old, I think. She went to presidency. Okay. My slide has some automatic forwarding thing. I must remember that. She went to Presidency College in Calcutta, in India. Now, Presidency College in Calcutta is an elite institution. So we're not talking about someone who is, you know, from the streets. She comes from a Bengali family. They have a background in Brahmo Samaj and Bengali movements of anti-imperialism, but also Bhadralok, kind of Bengali elite culture. And a very strong culture at that. Bengal is the intellectual, or Calcutta is the intellectual center of India, or was the intellectual center of Greater India before partition even. But she's born to independence. Well, not immediately, born in 42, so when she was 7 years old, India became independent. So she was born of that generation that was growing up with the question of what shall we do as Indians? But of course also the difficulty of seeing India split into two, into India and Pakistan, or India and later in the 70s, East Pakistan turned into Bangladesh with the war, and a lot of that action in those two events, independence and the emergence of Bangladesh, focused on Calcutta, as a lot of refugees came to that city. So that was a part of her context. But she is from the elite background, Brahmin, which means high caste, like a class system, but with some other connotations. You'd have to do a whole course on what that is. And in the Calcutta of that time, she grew up surrounded by students who are the 60s, right, who are agitated by political movements. The Telangana struggle of the peasants for land against the landlords, which was closed down by Moscow, by the Comintern, but they were fighting for like a present insurgency to get rid of the landlords, and the rule that there would be three parts of the crop. One part to the family, one part to the landlord, one part to the state. They fought for a bigger share to remove the landlord share. Telangana was, Tebaga and Telangana, and the Naxalite struggle, also a struggle against landlords, starting from a town in Naxalbari in the 60s, 66. These were a kind of agitation amongst students that excited even the elite college. Residency College was one of the sites for this. She grew up in this kind of context where the CPM, the Communist Party Marxist, was building power. They didn't take power, they took power in the 70s, but it was building a presence. In the center of India, in Delhi, the Congress, Gandhi's party was strong. But in Kerala and in Bengal, these two sites, the Marxist parties were very, very strong. And of course, they took the students with them, student mobilization. Right? They were still oppositional then, so it was okay to be Marxist. But she also did very well. Her class fraction does well in education, but she then became the top of the top. She got double first, English literature and something else, I'm not sure. So got very high results. And at that time, a bit like Vietnam maybe 5 years ago, anyone who did very well just kind of by expectation went overseas to do a PhD. Now I think in Vietnam that was the case, maybe it still is quite a lot, but it's changing a bit now because some places in Vietnam will offer a PhD and some of the best students are staying. And that's something for us to discuss. I want to talk about that next week a lot, actually, whether it's a good thing or not to have this brain drain. I mentioned it last week as well, right? Where your best students leave, your best people leave the nation for 4, usually longer, years and give their energy somewhere else. Okay, sometimes they bring back something good, but not always. And Spivak left for America and did not come back. Not to live anyway. She lived in America ever since. She went first to Iowa, I think, and then was at Cornell, Pittsburgh, and finally Columbia. These are going up the rankings of the rankings. Remember what I've said about university rankings, but going up the rankings of places to be as she became more and more successful in America. She did her MA and PhD, and while she was doing her PhD, she wrote to a guy called Jacques Derrida, which we've also written about, talked about before, and didn't ask, told him that she was translating his book, De la Grammatologie. She saw the book in a catalog, ordered the book, started to read it, saw it was about writing and philosophy, and thought, I'll translate this. And told Derrida, and Derrida said, okay. And she became very famous for that. Not only that, she was very critical of white feminism. She was a feminist, but working in America, she saw that many feminists were not aware of racism issues. They were promoting white women, and black women in America were still subject to. This is at the time of the civil rights movement and afterwards, right? She translated the Bengali writer Masweta Devi. And that's interesting because Masweta Devi was a writer who spoke about the poor of Bengal. She was especially involved with the Maoist and Naxalite youth, writing stories about them to promote their story. And so Spivak translated Masweta Devi into English and made the world aware of this writer and this set of issues around Naxalite. I think many people would not know about the Naxalite struggle, the peasant struggle in Bengal, because it was suppressed, right? But they would not know without the translations of Masweta Devi's work. Massively important. Eventually, Spivak took a position and said, well, Masweta Devi had made very brought the Naxalite issue into the mainstream, but she had a critique of that as well, because her critical thinking is always working. So she thought, yes, she has put them into the mainstream, but in a way wants to keep them fixed as peasants, because then they seem more heroically revolutionary, right? They're not moved out of that status of being the underdog into some path that will change that. So Masweta Devi was, the critique is that she is somehow profiting from or invested in writing for the Naxalites and writing about the Naxalite or the peasants, as the downtrodden, rather than maybe enabling the downtrodden to write themselves, something like that. And in the same way, that was her critique of white feminism. White feminists, when they occasionally did write about black women, wrote, yes, about the oppression of black women, but not in a way that made it possible for black women to lift up out of. Like they were speaking for them. And speaking for is ethically a problem. It's not speaking with or speaking to. Exchange. Anyway, nonetheless, by doing this translation work and writing certain essays like on international feminism, she becomes in demand on the conference circuit, and she travels and travels to so many places and gives so many talks. But one of her talks at the Conference of Marxism and the Interpretation of Culture is this essay, Can the Subaltern Speak? And somebody had written to me about what does subaltern mean, and so we should spend some time on that. But Can the Subaltern Speak is probably the most misunderstood essay, because she told the story of a woman called Bhubaneshwari, who was, she didn't say in the essay that she was, but who was Spivak's great-great-niece. So in her family, and the story was that Bhubaneshwari was a part of a cell, Al-Qaeda, a revolutionary group, and they are part of the anti-colonial movement, 1905, I think, Anushailan or something like that. They were charged with the job of assassinating the commissioner, the British. And they failed to do so. They failed to do the assassination and had to run, but their names became known, and it was likely that the police were coming to interrogate. In order not to give away her friends, her cell, to make sure the police could not torture her and find out who are your accomplices, who did you do this action with, she hung herself. Suicide. But in order to avoid anyone thinking that this young girl, 19 years old or 18 years old, killed herself for the usual reason, some love trauma, or she was pregnant by illicit, right? To make sure no one thought that, she didn't hang herself until she had her period. So she tried to make her body, she chose the time to commit suicide when she had her period, so no one could look at her, take her down and say, oh, it was because she had a boyfriend and got pregnant and she didn't know what to do. She was not pregnant. Right? She did that. That was her attempt to make her body say something, even though she was dead. But the family still did not think that through. They still said, oh, it must be because of some problematic love match, some romantic trauma or anxiety. So Spivak says, telling this story, so here the subaltern could not speak. The subaltern cannot speak. And everyone thought that Spivak had said, the subaltern, the poor people cannot speak. And this related to the issue of white feminism speaking for black women. And everyone got upset and said, look, she's just like them. She's saying that the poor cannot speak. That is not what she said. She said this woman had tried to speak, but the family could not hear what her body was saying. Not that the subaltern cannot speak. That was a bad, she says, unfortunate remark because it was misinterpreted. What she perhaps should have said was, the subaltern, the subordinated alternative, right? It's a military term. It comes from the military. It means the person who always is being told what to do. And because they cannot speak back to orders, right? They must obey, yes sir, in the army. But if you put it into the social world, those people who are the lowest of the low, they are always being told what to do. Believe this, do this, buy this, whatever. What Spivak should have said was, the subaltern, when they try to speak, the other classes, everyone cannot hear, cannot understand what they are saying because they are trying to speak out, but already all the other classes have a story ready in place about that person, the kind of things they are likely to say. You know what the poor will say, you know what the downtrodden will say, you don't really listen to what they're saying. So these subaltern refers to the people that are kind of outside the system of speaking. So when she says, can the subaltern speak? She means, hey, look, poor people are trying to say something to us, but we keep on trying to speak for them, to help them in the way that fits our ideology. Every other class, she means, including herself, including her Brahmanic background. No one really listens, and the subaltern cannot articulate a position. So what the task is not to stop everyone and make them listen, but to add skills and training for the subaltern to move into the path of being able to speak, which means they will not be subaltern anymore. So Spivak has spent the last 35 years teaching first of all at Columbia University as one of the top university professors. There are only 6 university professors at Columbia University. Columbia University is probably one of the top 3 universities in the world. Certainly the the top for social sciences and humanities. She teaches there for 35 years, and she teaches in remote rural Bengal. She teaches the poorest, she teaches the teachers of the poor to do critical thinking, to do reflexive thinking, to put people on the path of being able to speak to those who otherwise would not hear. It means teaching teachers to teach, to break with the standard way of treating the poorest of the poor, where what they are given really is not education, but basically compliance. Usually, they get taught some basic literacy, A, B, C, and they do it by rote learning, by repeating things over and over, to a very basic level that allows them to function in the Bengali society, which means they can vote, usually for someone who pays them 20 rupees, and they are articulated, they have skills enough to make it into the vote banks of the corrupt regional officials, but not skills enough to bypass those exploiters. That's the difference. Anyway, so she's working at these two ends. At the top elite end, doing European philosophy and theory, and at the beyond the democratic system, at the end of real exploitation, to train teachers to teach those people in a different way, a way that doesn't just draw them into further exploitation. There's a lot more about this. She's also very critical of microcredit systems and of institutions and of science, technology, special economic zones, and so on. You can read a lot of that in her two really amazing big books. Critique of Post-Colonial Reason. Post-colonial means something like, ironic sense, not simply after colonialism, but the post-colonial was a critique of the elites that took over the independence movements after the British left and made the Congress Party, or the Communist Party even, into simply a replacement of the British. Like the British with brown skin. Similar capitalist, similar opportunist, similar, like betraying the sense of possibility that the independence movement had. The independence movement meant it's possible for us to do something different in India than the old colonialism, but within 15 or 20 years, Nehruvian socialism was gone, and Indira Gandhi brought in systems that were very much, the emergency in 1975, were very much like British colonialism. For a certain class fraction, the post-colonial elite. Anyway, that's by the by. Critique of Post-Colonial Reason, an amazing book on Marx, on Hegel, on Kant, on high European theory, and how to make it tell a story for the rest of the world. And then aesthetic education in the age of globality, which is a kind of reference to Schiller, aesthetic education, and Walter Benjamin, the age of technical reason, or global age of globality is like in the age of technical reason, the Walter Benjamin essay. And these are amazing, but very difficult books. Anyway, so I want to do more of a proper intro to this idea, and especially this one. Figure. See, it does this. I don't know why. So she is traveling the world, maintains a relentless schedule of talks and visits. Just last year, she was in Trung Minh, just over the border from Vietnam, but we couldn't get her to come here, even though she wanted to. I was with her in Senegal the year before, or 2 years before that. A few years before that in Kosovo, many times in London and in Sweden, and she travels through Africa. She taught in China, she's taught in Angola, she taught in South America. South Africa, relentlessly traveling. Right? So this is an older woman now, but incredible energy and enthusiasm. She was given the 2012 Kyoto Prize. Very interesting that she's not a person who's like got a lot of research money and research grants, because her ethical thing means that she won't take money from the corporation, because they always demand a report on what was the result. And her result is, the result is really hard for her to say, well, the result was that people refused to participate in the World Bank scheme, or blah, blah, blah. Right? You can't really document and measure critical thinking. Those soft skills are not easily marked or assessed. I mean, yeah, some soft skills can be. But her work, and her book, especially Aesthetic Education, on Marx, Tagore, Coetzee, so many figures, is a patient, endlessly reading theory to produce this non-coercive training in how to rearrange the way you are taught to think by your schooling, to think, not independently even, to think critically and autonomously. As part of a culture, sure, but really make that autonomous and a model for aspiring to the possibility of what to do with surplus, instead of investing it more and more into production, to look after the upkeep of all, and for all of us to be participating in that, which is a key point from Tuckmark in Capital. She doesn't hide what her perspective is, but that doesn't affect the I don't think it's an issue for non-coercive training. It doesn't mean that you must become a Marxist. In fact, she supplements Marxism. That's how she talks about it. She talks about a critical supplement, because Marxism too can become an orthodoxy. Not to be against that, but to say, yes, okay, you have a sort of orthodox tradition of doing that, but even from reading Marx, we know there's something more nuanced is possible. Marx is much more interesting to read than most Marxism, you might say. I would say, following her. So with Spivak, you want a variety of styles and approaches in critical thinking. No one model is perfect, and no one model should be the result. So how do you do that? How do you do teaching that will result in variety and variation? That's the idea of research, really. When you do research, or when you do fieldwork in anthropology, or when you really do a serious survey in sociology, you should not know what the answer will be. You should know that an answer for a question in an area is unknown. But the idea should be, your search should be such that you are looking for that which you might find what was unexpected, what you didn't know. And that's why you need a variety of styles. You need to do anthropological fieldwork and survey work and this. Each person can do just one style, sure, but even better is if you use a multiple yourself. Your search is for the unanticipated and unexpected, because that's what will make you think differently than you do now. I mean, you don't need to do research if you're already gonna, if the result is gonna be the same as what you already thought. And too many people in the universities and in the companies do research where you know exactly what the result will be already. That's like market research, right? We have market research where the people who make products want to do a survey to find out how good their product is. What percentage liked it, what percent didn't like it, and they just want to improve their product. That's not really research. That's marketing. Research is something more than market research. Research will be to look for that which you don't know. You don't know the answer. And it can't be just improving products. Now, while she is saying that we want to promote the non-coercive questioning of the ethics of research, at the same time, we must recognize that culture has been under threat for 500 years maybe. Under capitalism, from Columbus going to the Americas, the death and killing that comes along with the clash of cultures in the Huntington sense has been devastating. And the humanities and the social sciences is also in part a kind of damage control. And that's not a bad thing. To restore the histories, to tell the stories of those that have been destroyed and lost. Then, again, I've already talked about how information is used ethically is a key question. So let's go back a little bit through these things very carefully. Oh, here she is with, she was once young, with Jacques Derrida. They had, translation leads to something else. Here she is with the Kyoto Prize. Okay, and this is a very typical kind of photograph, right? When we try to unpack and this question of the critical wherewithal to handle data, she's passionate about this. And you see this is her standard pose, the making the point, fighting for the point. This is her politics. Here she is giving a talk again, the same kind of searching. Her book Outside in the Teaching Machine, was really important where this issue comes up. Interesting to look at her fascination with trinkets and objects, this elephant on the cover, a kind of music box. All right. Now, there's nothing easy about the critical thinking that she wants to introduce. It's not like you have to just check off reflexivity or critical think ethically, or I've done my ethical thinking, like a form at the beginning and then forget about it, which is what universities do. If you want to do research in this university or any university, actually, I don't remember doing it for my research grant here, but certainly for research grants in the UK, you get one page where you have to check and say your topic has been to the ethics committee. And you go to the ethics committee with your project and say, yes, I'm not experimenting on little children and I'm not doing anything, that will endanger people or something like that, or I'm not exporting sacred relics or something. But really, what that's about is the ethics committee is checking to see that you're not doing anything that will mean lawyers come and sue the university. But they do it in a tick box kind of way and then set aside. She doesn't mean that kind of reflexivity, not something you can do on a form and then forget about. It must be built in as a habit of thought to your practice. To always be raising this kind of question. And raising this kind of question in ways that we haven't yet thought about. And it might be, I don't know, I have a stereotype of younger people. It might be that you'll raise questions about ecology and environment or gender in ways that the ethics committee would not even think was an ethical question. What is an ethical question for you? Not for me, not what I say, ethical. I'm thinking, what, and you coming to your decision about those things is a crucial part of your education, your self-education in the university, in society, becoming an adult, etc., or something like that, right? Deciding how your background and past and what you read and what you're doing affects your decisions about what you're going to do. And she means you need to get into the skills to be able to use reflexivity to really think effectively about these questions. So this is a constant and slow practice, a patient practice of raising these kind of questions. Of course, she does it with her toolbox for producing ethical, reflexive questions is European philosophy. So she's talking about difficult concepts, post-colonial, subaltern. Another key one is epistemological change. What is epistemological change? An episteme, it's kind of a phrase that Foucault made popular, is a way of thinking from a certain position that arranges the objects of the world. So into categories, for example, woman, men, environment, economy, exchange, gift, theoretical concepts. And this arrangement of theoretical concepts changes over time as well. And epistemic change, epistemological change, is one where we work to actually think a different arrangement of concepts. A big one that's happening now that many people globally are thinking about is the relation of gender, women, male, and trans. Right? And there's a big, I don't know if you've seen this in UK and the US, but certainly there and elsewhere, a big conflict over those who talk about women as and men as genderly determined, or trans and their experience there, right? New conceptual arrangement, and some people are talking about that in terms of an epistemic change that affects the way in which people will deploy categories. So like, if you think from the epistemic perspective of trans, can you even have something like women's studies? That kind of area of, or feminism. In fact, what is feminism? How is it changing? Of course you can still have feminism and trans. But can men participate? Whether they are men anymore. This is effectively the way in which knowledge, and you have a stake in knowledge, is ethically challenged by the epistemic. Now for Spivak, the big question that I think she uses to really challenge people is to ask, how is your knowledge related to a community? How is your idea of what is knowledge and who should have knowledge and what knowledge should be used for? How is that related to a community like your community? Your neighbors, whether they be your next door neighbors or your nation, a different level of neighbors, right? And should knowledge be used to arrange for that surplus to be reinvested in the nation or the community, or where? We need knowledge, we need data to be manipulated to be able to make decisions about these issues. A real case of this is right now, Ho Chi Minh City. Ho Chi Minh City previously kept 18% of its tax revenues to work on the city on projects, and the rest went first to Hanoi and then distributed to the rest of the country. Right, that's the lowest level for any city in Vietnam, but up until the decision of the party recently, 18% of revenues was spent on projects within Ho Chi Minh City, and the rest, the surplus, went to the rest of the country. Now it's been decided, and we should investigate how they decided it, but they used a lot of information to decided to increase that to 33%. So 33%, that's nearly, sorry, my maths is terrible, 18, 33, it's nearly double, right? What's 2 times 18? That will be 20, 30, 36. So 33% is nearly to double the amount of resources, income, right, that comes to the city will stay in the city for projects like, I don't know, the train system or roads or flood development, or the development of the Eastern District Science Innovation Hubs. And I'm going to talk about that later in the course as well, because science and knowledge, right? But what was the information, what was the data they looked at to make that decision? First of all, how do they work out what is 18% of revenue and 33% of revenue? That's manipulating very big data. And then how do they defend or argue using information and decisions about knowledge to say it should be 33%? Does the rest of the country only need 67% of the surplus to survive? It's a big country, a lot of people, especially the Delta. Does the city have a responsibility to look after? These are really important, crucial questions, and that's what people who have been trained in the humanities and social sciences will enter into those decisions and discussions. And that's really important. We can't say that's not important. You can aim to be a part of those kind of discussions, perhaps. Actually, it's 1 hour now. All right, I will. All right, I'm going to skip forward now because we're going to have a break in a minute just to do an exercise. Okay? I want you on the board using chalk to make a kind of map thinking about what the new information technologies are that you use today. Well, what are the information technologies you have access to? What do you use in your studies, in your intellectual life, your social life as well, to the extent that that's about ideas? I want to make a kind of list, but a map, in a way, a mind map. Mind map, you know what that kind of thing is. On the board, I want people to put up what are the things that are technologies that allow us to do humanities and social science work. What do you use? These kind of things you use, right? You haven't got one. You use notes and pen, but you also use that. You use you use this. Like I mean, do you understand what I mean? Somebody, there's plenty of chalk. Okay, we are going to have a break as well, so I'm going to turn this off. Just a pause for a bit.